So in the last video, we started off by talking about the changes in the prices, and that these changes in the prices of one good, in this particular example, we're going to change the price of burgers. And we said that whenever we change the price of burgers, what happened to our budget constraints? Well, our budget constraints rotated. It either rotated out because of a decrease in the price, or it rotated in because of an increase in the price. And the other thing that we noticed is that the amount of burgers that were consumed as the prices changed, they changed, as well as the amount of tacos that were being consumed, well, they changed. So what's causing these changes? What's causing them to shift? Well, the change is caused because of one of two reasons. It's either because of the substitution effect or the income effect. So what is the substitution effect? First off, we're dealing with two goods that are technically substitutes here. We could consume tacos or hamburgers, and we could give up tacos for hamburgers or hamburgers for tacos. We could substitute them out. So the substitution effect says that a decline in price relative to another good encourages the consumption of the original good. So a key thing is this word relative. The relative means to compare things. So if we compare the price of hamburgers to tacos, it'll show us how many tacos is the market willing to give up for a hamburger. So the price of tacos in this example is 50 cents. So in this case, a person or the market as a whole would be willing to give up 2.5 tacos to gain one hamburger. Versus if the price was just $1, the market would only be willing to give up 2 tacos rather than 2.5 for one more burger. So relative to tacos, these burgers are now cheaper. So whenever we talk about the term relative, we're comparing it back to something. So what is the price of burgers relative to the price of tacos? What is the price of tacos relative to the price of burgers? So the substitution effect says that a decline in the price relative to another good encourages consumption of the original good. So the decline in price of hamburgers is going to encourage a higher consumption of hamburgers. And guess what happens? We go from 2 hamburgers to 3 hamburgers because the price fell. So as prices of burgers fall relative to tacos, priced burgers are cheaper. So people substitute more burgers for tacos. They eat less tacos, more hamburgers. It just makes sense, doesn't it? That if the price falls, you consume more of that good. That's the substitution effect. The other effect is known as the real income effect. A decline in the price of a good increases the real income of a consumer, encouraging consumption of that good. So what is real income? Well, real income deals more with not really what is the price, but how many physical goods can we obtain? So let's think about this income, or this real income, in terms of how many burgers can we afford? Well, when the price was $1.25 and the budget was $5, how many burgers could we afford if we only had burgers? We could afford 4 burgers at $1.25 a piece. That's our real income, is a real tangible good. It's 4 burgers. That's our real income. Now, the price of the hamburger falls, but the budget doesn't change. Now, how many hamburgers can we afford? We can afford 5. Guess what? Our income never changed, but our real income increased because the budget, or because the price of that good fell. We could afford more of those actual goods. But what happens if the price goes up? What if the price was, say, for example, $5? Then our real income would only be 1 hamburger. So if the price of hamburgers fall, you can now buy more hamburgers or tacos or both. So just because the price of hamburgers falls doesn't necessarily mean that you can only buy more hamburgers. Because now think about it this way. What if that price of hamburger fell to $3 and before you consume 2 hamburgers? What if you only want to consume 2 hamburgers? But the price of hamburgers now fell? What if that was your marginal utility, and dealing back with that marginal utility per dollar, and under a different situation, that indifference curve was actually set up a lot differently, and the price of these hamburgers actually fell by 25 cents, but you still only want 2 hamburgers? Well, if that was the case, you might be inclined to consume more tacos. So because the price of hamburgers fell, you could now buy more hamburgers, but you also have more money left over to buy more tacos. Or you might even decide to buy more of both, just depending on how your indifference curve is. So the real income effect basically says that a decline in the price of a good is basically going to allow you to buy more goods, so you're going to buy more goods with it. Whereas the substitution effect says that the price of a good increases, or if the price of a good falls, you can now afford more of those goods, and you're probably going to, the substitution effect says that if the price falls for a good, it's now relatively cheaper as you compare it to something else, leading you to buy more of those particular goods. So, now that we've kind of got the substitution effect and the real income effect down, and why a price change is going to cause different amounts of consumption to happen, and just think about the way it would be in your own personal life. Think about, well, what if you were consuming coffee and tea? I used that in one of our last examples. You're consuming coffee and tea. The price of coffee goes up. You might start buying more tea because the relative price of tea just went down as you compare it to coffee. Versus, let's say that the price of coffee goes up. Well, now you have less of a budget to buy coffee with, and you might be buying more tea, but you're also going to be buying less coffee, and maybe even less tea in the whole process because the prices went up. So just compare these two effects back to your own personal life. Now, if you see on this chart, we have a point A, a point B, and a point C. So these point A, point B, and point C, the lines connecting them is the makings of what is considered the price consumption curve. This price consumption curve is going to show the quantities of each good that we are going to consume, whether it's hamburgers or tacos or whatever 2 goods you decide to put in this side and this side. It's going to show you the amount of each good that you're going to buy at the different prices. At a price of $1 per hamburger, you're going to consume 3 hamburgers. At the price of $1.25, you're going to consume 2 hamburgers. At the price of $5, you're going to consume less than 1 hamburger. So if the prices were continuously verified, guess what we could do? If the prices were continuously checked and how much are we consuming at each price, then we could actually come up with a full set of prices and quantities for each good. We could figure out that at each of these different levels of prices, we could get a full set of prices and quantities. If we graph these series of prices and quantities, we would get a downward sloping demand curve. So I mentioned at the very beginning of this, we are leading all of this up into a demand curve. And this is where we begin to connect the links. So I'm going to back up before we go much further. We have the indifference curves, or the ISO utility curves for an individual consumer. How much are they willing to give up of one good for another to keep the same level of utility? Then we add their budget constraint in there. We add the budget constraint in there, and the budget shows how much can they afford. And then we combine the two together to find that consumer equilibrium. So now that we've got this consumer equilibrium, we know how much they're going to be consuming at different price levels. Or we know how much they're going to be consuming if prices stay the same and the budget stays the same. But now we're going to start manipulating that budget. We're going to start our budget constraint. We're going to see what happens if we increase our budget or decrease our budget. If we increase prices and decrease prices like we're doing right here. And then as we increase and decrease prices, guess what? We start to identify the amount, the quantities that are going to be consumed at different price levels. We use the prices and quantities together, and we get what is now known as this demand curve, and that's where we're going to be heading to next in this chapter.